Everybody, thanks for watching and thanks for taking the time to purchase and support. And welcome to Ancient History Volume 3. So now, if you've been paying attention, you've seen the first two volumes, of course, by now, you see how this is going. We basically taking it from where the Egyptians was, conquered, and you had the empire taken over by the Greeks and everything that transpired after that. Because when you start looking at history, everything takes place after the fall of Kemet. We see the rise of the European powers. We see the Renaissance and everything like that leading up to, what we know today. But this is where they established this faulty history, and it's biblical, the so-called biblical history that is false. So when you go back into antiquity and you can start tracing from the time when the Egyptian empire fell, what the Greeks was doing and what these people they are talking about in the Middle East, in Egypt or what have you, what was going on with the so-called Jews, the Greeks and the Romans and everything that was happening with the wars of the Diadochi and everything like that. What took place? Because it's in this time that we can uncover the truth. It's in this time that we can see exactly what took place and how they was able to, push in this history. And that's exactly what they did. You have the truth and you have this history that they made up. And what they did was, as I showed you guys, they basically piggybacked off of real Greek history and been able to basically show what the Greeks was doing in the wars of the Greeks, that, there's actual proof of these wars, and then basically put themselves in the Greek shoes, but as Jews. So all these so-called wars that the Jews was fighting is talking about in Genesis and everything like that, that supposedly the Jews was going out and conquering and fighting and everything. But when you go and look for that, you're going to see evidence of war, but not of the Jews. So as I showed you guys, it's really the Greeks talking about themselves and their wars and their battles that they had, along the way. This is what this is about. So when you get that aspect of it, it's still a lot of things that they have to explain and put in place. One of the major things will be, first of all, how is it that you had Hellenization going on, the Greeks going around, instilling all these beliefs and conquering everything, and basically, as I showed you with the wars of the Diadochi, how they divided up the land. So how we have this going on in Hellenization in process, but for some reason, these Jews are allowed to practice Judaism. What is that? So this is how you really start to pay attention and reveal what really took place. Because you have in ancient Kemet, we know when they took over, I showed you guys at the museum, Serapis, Zeus Ammon, and all these so-called Greek guys, that everything that they instill in Egypt to try to get the Egyptians to believe. But when you get down to Israel, for some reason, they say, okay, you know what? We're going to take over, but we're going to let the Jews keep the religion and keep following it. What's up with that? And then we know later on they would follow it themselves. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense for all this to be going on. And then somehow, everybody, it's just Jews. Christians, everybody following this doctrine of a people that's conquered by a stronger people, supposedly. So when you start looking at it from this point, you can see what took place. But when you start to really know the history and everything behind it, it starts to basically show you the truth, and it makes a lot more sense. So now, as I said, I talked about how they had to go out and make these people. They had to go out and make sure that they can create Jews. They had to create these Hebrews to explain this history, as I talked about in the books of the Bible series. I talked about that in edited Exodus and Leviticus. So definitely you want to see those. But understand, you got to create these people. They had to explain a lot of this history because there is no proof. So if you're going to be trying to interject these people into history, you got to explain certain things that don't make sense. Now, when you're a person when you know about something and somebody comes and tries to talk about it, if you know everything about the situation, you can tell when they're lying. You can tell. It's like when somebody say they saw a movie and they can't really give you any parts of the movie. It's like, you ain't see that movie. Like, I can tell, I seen it. I don't know what you're talking about. So they have to try to cover for every single part. Every single scholar that's poking holes in the story is always a comeback. You ever see those real bad liars? They always got something, an excuse. They're always saying something to try to basically make up for their story sounding like bullshit. this is exactly what's happening with the antiquities of the Jews and their history. So it's a lot they have to explain and answer for. One of the things they got to explain, they have to tell us how, one, they was in Egypt in the 6th century BCE and how they disappeared. So first of all, one, you got to put yourself there and explain how are you there. And as I said, these people that are there are actually Greeks. And we're going to get into that in a second. But when you understand, when you start going back in history, how are you going to talk about one people and not the other, especially if this one group is supposed to be as glorious and huge as the Jews when you read the Old Testament. So when you have pharaohs and you have documentation of the Egyptians speaking of the Greeks and showing the Greeks, but no Jews, it's telling you, I mean, everything is giving you those connections right there that they were the Jews. That's who they're placing themselves to be. So they have to explain, one, how, because this is their claim, that the Babylonians came into Israel and basically took them into captivity into Babylon. Now, what they know is, they understand, and proof a show, that there were Assyrians. The Assyrians was coming into Kemet, and there was always these little wars and skirmishes between the Egyptians and the Assyrians. And the Assyrians would basically take over part of Lower Kemet. So this is them again trying to interject themselves during a period where there's war and stuff happen, because then it's chaos and stuff get lost, and you can't explain everything during the war because it's not going to be so much pieces. It's just going to be remnants of a war. But there's other stories to be told that's basically destroyed and covered up by war. They understand this, so they want to interject themselves into this period of time and say, well, I guess during this time the Babylonians came in and basically took them. Just for some reason, they ain't want no Egyptians. They wanted to, for some reason, just take the Hebrews and take them all the way back to Babylon, these grown-ass men and women, and just enslave them for whatever reason. So this is what they claim, because they have to basically answer for the fact that they're not there during this war. During this time, when you had Samtek I, who Herodotus talks about, know he exists. This is Egyptian pharaoh. During this time, when Samtek is basically fighting the Assyrians, we're the Jews. If y'all was there, where are y'all? Greeks was there, but there's no mention of no Jews. And I understand this. So when you read here saying, now this is the military campaign of Samtek. It says Samtek won Egypt's independence from the Assyrian Empire and restored Egypt's prosperity during his 54-year reign. The pharaoh proceeded to establish close relation with archaic Greece. Telling you right there, that connection, we know that was there. The hieroglyphics and everything I talk about with them showing the depictions of white men being there. So we know the Greeks was there. And also encouraged many Greek settlers to establish colonies in Egypt and serve in the Egyptian army. In particular, he settled some Greeks at Taphnis. So now don't let the whole thing fool you about the Assyrians. Understand the Assyrians, when they talk about the Assyrian Empire, it also includes the Babylonians and the Sumer and the Akkadians. You have the Egyptians successfully defeating the Assyrians, which we would assume would include Sumer, the Babylonians, and the Akkadians. Now, if they can defeat these people, why would they have a hard time or basically lose in the conquest from the Babylonians? Because see, they want you to believe that the Babylonians came into ancient Kemet, defeated the Egyptians, the Babylonians alone. We know there's supposed to have been skirmishes and wars, civil wars in Mesopotamia between the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and the Babylonians are supposed to have won. And you got to understand that whole thing when you start seeing Babylonians. Of course, somebody's talking about something biblical. Assyrians, they're talking about historical stuff, because that's what, the name that they use, and they try to really differentiate between the two. But mostly when you see Babylon, it's dealing with something biblical. They always throw that in there to give that reference, because the Bible's talking about, Babylon, the Babylonians. So, it's tough to believe that they was able to defeat them when the Egyptians had already beaten the Assyrians in a larger army. So now, Necho II, Egyptian pharaoh, son of Samtek I, named after his father. He takes the throne 610 BCE. This is supposed to be around the time when the Babylonians come in and basically take the Egyptians out of Syria and out of Israel. So now it says here, Necho undertook a number of construction projects across his kingdom in his reign. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Necho II sent out an expedition of Phoenicians, as I talked about before in part one of ancient history. I told you guys the Phoenicians was there in Kemet. Plain and simple. They basically was the Egyptians. The Phoenicians, as I said, the purple people, name given by the Greeks, they were Egyptians. And there's other people who was basically there in Phoenicia to basically run that territory, because it's basically trade grounds. But it's telling you right here that he took the Phoenicians. These are Egyptians. It's just the name they used, the Greeks used, but they were down there, and they were, in Tyre, and we know Israel's along the way. They ruled Israel as well. This whole stretch of lands I talked about, ruled by ancient Egyptians. This is during the ancient Egyptian empire. They had control of this land. So it's saying Necho II set out an expedition of Phoenicians, which in 3 years sailed from the Red Sea around Africa to the mouth of the Nile. Now, this is the important part down here. They say Necho played a significant role in the histories of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and the Kingdom of Judah. Because, of course, they're going to throw that bull crap in there. This is bullshit. I'm going to tell you why. Necho II is most likely the pharaoh mentioned in several books of the Bible. They could say that with no proof. Where's the proof of that? So, where's his name? They don't want to mention no more names because they already messed up with Ramses. That was a monumental mistake, put Ramses' name in there, knowing it's not going to add up. But it's real easy for them to just come out and say, well, he's the pharaoh probably mentioned in the Bible, to try to fit them in there. That's what it's about. Giving you enough to make it seem like they're telling the truth and that this stuff fits when it's all bogus. They could say anything. Where's the proof to back it up? He had nothing to do with this kingdom. But what they do is, since they understand it was turmoil around this time, it's not so much you can do to find proof. They interject people in these places. And this is one of the things that's weird when they try to interject Jews in servitude of the Egyptians, as if they work side by side. So to give us Jehoiakim, it says here, Jehoiakim was appointed by King Necho II, king of Egypt, in 608 BC. After Necho's return from the Battle of Haran, 3 months after he had killed King Josiah at Megiddo. Now, Jehoiakim was supposedly king of Judah, Judea, however you want to pronounce it. He was the king there. So it's highly unlikely that the Egyptians, Necho II, brought him in to basically rule while he was out at war. Why aren't y'all fighting alongside each other? What is he doing there? So again, this is they have to interject these people in to try to make it fit, to make it seem like, the Egyptians and the Greeks was just mingling in there together, but there's no proof of that. Plain and simple. They have to explain how they are in Israel during this time that the Egyptians are in power. And they're trying to make it like, well, they was in servitude to the Egyptians, basically working side by side. The Egyptians was appointing them to do stuff. But it's already giving you that hint when I was just explaining to you how you had, since they know, you had Samtek and you had Necho basically getting the Greeks to work with them. That's documented. That's something we can prove from Herodotus and the Egyptians themselves that says and attests to the fact the Greeks and the Egyptians was living alongside. Where is any mention of the Jews? So they had to put this in there. Well, it was the Egyptians, it was the Greeks and the Jews, but it's no mention of the Jews. But they got to explain for that. They have to explain that. They have to explain why and how they are there and in what capacity are they supposedly in Kemet during this time. There's no mention of them except for, bullshit like this. So now we're talking about the 6th century BCE. We know what's about to happen. We know eventually the Persians are going to come in there and take over Kemet from the Egyptians, right? So the whole question you have to ask yourself is, you have all these stories of the Jews in the Bible going out fighting these wars, conquering the whole nine. I just read to you how Necho II supposedly put a Jew in charge of basically running this area while he was out at war, giving you the hint that you had not only the Greeks working with the Egyptians, but the Jews as well in some capacity. So you would think it's a lot of them there. So the whole thing is, we know that the Persians came over. Now, according to the Jews, supposedly on their way to Kemet, to conquer Kemet, they stopped in Babylon, liberated the Jews. So they liberated the Jews, freed them, beat the Babylonians, came over to Israel, beat the Babylonians there. Now, maybe if it did really happen, which we know it didn't, maybe, you can say that the Persians told some of the Jews that, hey, we're going to Israel, whatever they called it back then, and go ahead and take that land from the Babylonians as well. Y'all should meet us up there, or what have you. But we don't know what the case was. But somehow, they made it up there. But the whole thing, again, is what you would have to explain. Well, there is no evidence or information that the Jews joined with the Persians to beat the Egyptians. They would like to have you believe that, so they can try to make it fit. Like, okay, well, maybe the Jews joined with the Persians since they freed them from Babylon and came up there and helped defeat the Egyptians. But that wouldn't make sense, because you would think they would have been strong enough to beat the Greeks, which they wasn't.